It's a warm summer evening in 2023, and the city of Denver is buzzing with life. People are out on patios, grabbing drinks after work, the hum of traffic blending into the background of a typical Thursday night. But inside my apartment, everything is unusually quiet. For a brief moment, I can almost forget what's been brewing beneath the surface of my life. But that feeling doesn't last long. You see, I'm Mike. I'm 34. A software engineer by day, and for the last few years, I've been married to Julia. We met in college. She was in the biology program. I was more into tech. She was tall, blonde, a bit quirky but with a seriousness about her that intrigued me. I remember thinking that she was way out of my league, but somehow, after a few awkward encounters in study halls, we hit it off. We'd been together for nearly 6 years now, and for the most part, I thought we had it all figured out. That's the thing about marriage, right? You think you've got it nailed until you realize you really don't. Julia and I have a comfortable life. She works as a research scientist at a tech startup, and while we aren't rolling in money, we've got a nice apartment, 2 cars that still run, and a solid routine. We do the weekend brunch thing, binge Netflix shows on Sundays, and occasionally talk about maybe starting a family in a year or two. Sounds simple, but it was good, or so I thought. And for the first couple of years of our marriage, things were easy. We were still in that blissful phase where everything felt like an adventure. But over time, I started noticing small things. At first, it was nothing to worry about. Little snarky comments here and there, or the occasional distracted glance while we were talking. You know, the type of stuff you brush off, thinking it's just the stress of work or life getting to her. But then it became harder to ignore. The thing that hit me hardest was how distant Julia started to seem. She didn't talk about her day as much. When she did, it was just details, nothing about how she was feeling. And let's be real, it's always the feeling part that counts. Isn't it? I tried asking her about it a few times. Her responses were typical. I'm just tired, Mike. But there was always something more in her tone that I couldn't quite place. And then there was her phone. I'm not the type of guy to snoop through other people's phones, let alone my wife's. But you know that feeling when something just doesn't feel right? That gut feeling that tells you to check. So one evening, after she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she ran to the grocery store, I made the decision to take a look. I know, I shouldn't have done it. But there it was, right in front of me. I opened her messages. The first text was from someone I didn't recognize. It was a simple, "How was your day?" Beautiful. The message was from a number I had never seen before, and I could feel my heart rate picking up just reading those words. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something told me to keep going. I scrolled up. There were more messages. Casual chat, a few inside jokes, and then one from earlier that day. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll pick you up after work." That last line sent a chill down my spine. My stomach turned, and I felt that ugly knot of suspicion forming. When Julia got home, she was cheerful, chatting about her day like everything was fine. But inside, I was in turmoil. Who was this person? Why was she texting my wife like that? I tried to act normal, but inside, my mind was racing. I wanted to confront her right there and then, but I didn't want to make a scene. We'd never had big fights. I couldn't do this now, not like this. So I bottled it up. The days that followed felt like a blur. Every time I saw Julia, I couldn't shake the image of that text. The cheerful tone in her voice, the smile she gave me when I kissed her goodnight. It all felt fake. I couldn't stop imagining her with someone else. I couldn't stop wondering who this mystery person was. Meanwhile, I tried to keep things together. My work was busy, but I kept running those texts over and over in my head. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a friend. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then the next bombshell dropped. I was working late one Friday, mindlessly coding through a project I'd been stuck on all week. Julia had left earlier for a girls' night, she said. But as the night wore on and I finished my work, I decided to call it a night too. I walked into our bedroom to change out of my clothes when I noticed something odd on the dresser. It was Julia's wallet. I knew she hadn't forgotten it. She never forgot her wallet, especially when she went out. I took it and opened it, just to see if she'd left something important behind. And there it was, inside the wallet, a receipt. From a fancy restaurant. The date on the receipt was from earlier that week, the same day she told me she was working late. I stared at it for a while, the reality sinking in. Couldn't breathe. The dots started connecting in my mind. She hadn't been working late. She'd been out with someone else. At that moment, everything I thought I knew about my marriage crumbled. Felt like the ground was falling out beneath me. I stood there for what seemed like forever, my mind spinning. Should I confront her? Should I wait until she gets home? I didn't know. My hands were shaking, my thoughts scattered. By the time Julia came home, it was nearly midnight. She stepped in, a little tipsy, her makeup slightly smudged. She was acting like everything was normal, but I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I sat her down, and I asked her point blank, "Who were you with tonight, Julia?" Her face went pale. It wasn't the reaction I expected. I thought she would deny it, brush it off, but instead, she froze. And in that silence, I knew. I'm sorry, Mike," she said, avoiding my eyes. "It's just, I didn't know how to tell you." And that was it. The floodgates opened. The truth came pouring out, piece by piece. She had been seeing someone else. For months. My mind was a blur of disbelief and anger. I wanted to scream, to throw things, but all I could do was sit there and process the shattered pieces of our life. I had to step away from it all. My body was tense, my head a mess. I couldn't stay in that room. I had to walk out. Get away. I grabbed my jacket, and without saying another word, I left. The air outside was cool, but it didn't offer the comfort I needed. My mind kept replaying her words, her apology, her confession, but none of it made sense. How could she betray me like this? What happened to the woman I married? I walked the streets, lost in thought, trying to figure out what to do next. But the truth was, I didn't know. The only thing I did know was that things would never be the same again. I ended up walking for hours that night, my feet numb, my mind still racing. I didn't know where I was headed, but I couldn't bring myself to go back to that apartment. I couldn't face her. Julia's words, her apology. It all felt like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. By the time I found myself sitting on a park bench, the sun had started to rise. The cool air of the early morning didn't offer me the clarity I was desperately searching for, but it gave me time to think. It gave me time to be angry. I kept telling myself that she hadn't just lied to me that night. No, this had been going on for months. Months. The idea of her seeing someone else while we were still living in the same space was unbearable. It wasn't just the physical act. It was the emotional betrayal. She had someone else to confide in. Someone else to talk to. All the things I thought were ours, the good morning texts, the long talks about our future, the little shared moments that should have kept us connected, they were all a lie. But here's the thing. I knew Julia. I thought I knew her. She wasn't the type to just cheat and walk away. Or at least I didn't think she was. This wasn't some impulsive affair. No, this felt different. The longer I sat there, the more I began to piece together what had been happening. There had to be more to it. Eventually, I couldn't just sit around anymore. I had to confront her. But this time, I wasn't going to just sit back and take it. I was going to get the full truth. The confrontation. I went back home that morning, prepared to face her, prepared to get the answers I needed. I didn't know if I could forgive her, but I sure as hell wasn't going to sit in ignorance. Julia was in the kitchen when I walked in, sipping coffee like it was any other morning. But it wasn't. Nothing about this was normal. She looked up when she heard the door open, her eyes meeting mine. There was something in her expression, almost like relief. But before I could say anything, she spoke first. "Mike, I'm so sorry for how I handled everything. I should have, but I cut her off. I couldn't let her keep talking in circles." "No," I said, my voice a little rougher than I wanted. "I need to hear it from you. I need to know what's been going on. All of it." Her face went pale, and she hesitated before sitting down at the kitchen table, her coffee forgotten. "I never meant for it to get this far," Julia said, her voice cracking. I was confused, Mike. I thought we were fine. But I was so unhappy." I stared at her. "Unhappy? Unhappy? How was I supposed to even process that? You were unhappy? I echoed, trying to keep the rage from seeping into my words. So you cheated on me? How the hell is that supposed to make sense? I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. It wasn't about you. It was about me. And him. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. And then he made me feel alive again. Him. That word sent a cold wave over me. She was talking about the guy from her messages. The one who had been texting her, telling her how beautiful she was. The one who'd picked her up after work. That's what she was telling me. That she was looking for something else because something was missing between us. I didn't know what was worse. The fact that she had betrayed me, or that she had been thinking about leaving me for someone else all this time. My mind couldn't keep up with the wave of emotions that kept crashing over me. You think that just because he made you feel good, it makes what you did okay? I asked, my voice shaking with anger. You think that's some excuse? I didn't know how to tell you, she said again. This time her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to fix things. And then it just happened. She was crying now, but it didn't matter. I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. Not yet. I was too angry. I needed answers, but part of me already knew what was coming next. I'm sorry, Mike. I truly am, she said, wiping her eyes. But I don't think I can stay here anymore. Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had been expecting something like this, but hearing her actually say it out loud made it real. This wasn't just a momentary lapse. This was her telling me she wanted out. Shifting realities. I walked away from the table, pacing around the living room. I didn't know where to go from here. I wanted to shout. I wanted to throw things. I wanted to leave. But where would I go? I didn't even know who I was anymore. I didn't know who she was anymore. And then there was the question I'd been avoiding. What now? Julia stood up and walked toward me. She tried to reach out to me, but I stepped back. Mike, please. I know this is hard, but I don't want to hurt you. I just need some space to figure things out. I nodded, but I wasn't listening to her anymore. Couldn't. It felt like I had just fallen into a nightmare, one I couldn't wake up from. I can't fix this, I said finally, my voice hollow. Not like this. Julia's face crumpled. I never wanted to hurt you, Mike. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I don't know what's right. Her words made no difference. The damage had already been done. The aftermath. The next few days passed in a blur. I stayed at a friend's place. I tried to ignore my phone, but of course it kept ringing. The texts kept coming in. My mind kept replaying everything Julia had said, everything that had happened. And then, a few days later, the truth hit me. This wasn't just about the affair. This was about the erosion of our marriage. All the little things I hadn't seen, the distance, the silent treatment, the casual dismissals, it all made sense now. But it didn't change the fact that I felt hollow. I felt like I had given my all to something that had never been as real as I thought. As I sat at my friend's place, scrolling mindlessly through social media, I saw something that made my stomach churn. Julia had posted a picture of her and him, the guy from the texts. They were sitting together at a cafe, laughing. She looked so happy, and I knew in that moment that this wasn't some mistake. It was a choice she had made without thinking about what it would cost her, about what it would cost us. I threw my phone down in frustration. What was left for me? Where did I go from here? I know this is a tough situation for anyone to be in, but I want to hear what you think. If you've ever dealt with betrayal or even just tough relationships, leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on what Mike should do next. And if you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates. It was a cool Friday evening in mid-November, and I was finally settling into the routine of my life after a long week of working and managing the chaotic moments that seemed to crop up every day. At 32, I had always prided myself on being someone who had control, both in my personal and professional life. By all outward appearances, everything seemed fine. I had a successful career in marketing, a small but cozy apartment in the city, and, most importantly, a husband I had been with for the past 5 years, Chris. We had met in college, and our relationship was the kind of easy love that seemed to fall into place without any real effort. But even the most seemingly perfect lives can be built on fragile ground. Chris was the steady type, dependable and loving, always trying to make our home warm and full of laughter. We didn't have the flashiest lifestyle, but we had enough to enjoy the quiet moments until we didn't. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like I was missing something. At first, it was subtle, small cracks in our otherwise picture-perfect life. A late-night work call here, a too-long lunch there, and suddenly, I was starting to wonder if the same love I had for Chris was being reflected back at me. Maybe I was being paranoid. It was easy to brush it off. After all, wasn't I just overthinking things? I had always been the type to worry too much about little things. But then, something happened that made me start questioning everything. The shift. It started innocently enough. A random comment from one of my friends at a get-together one Saturday night. We were sitting in a quiet corner of the bar, a group of us catching up, when one of them, Jenna, mentioned how amazing her husband looked after his recent weight loss. "Steve's looking like a new man," she had said, beaming as she showed us before and after pictures on her phone. "He's been hitting the gym like crazy." I smiled, nodding along, but something in the back of my mind stirred. I had always been content with Chris' laid-back demeanor. Sure, he had put on a bit of weight over the years, but I didn't care about that. Or so I told myself. The truth was, I hadn't even noticed how much his appearance had changed until that moment. That's when it hit me. My friends were all talking about how fit and attractive their husbands were, and I realized that I had never shared the same level of pride in Chris' appearance. In fact, when I really looked at him, I noticed that he wasn't looking like the man I had once fallen in love with. And suddenly, that feeling grew. Chris was no longer just my husband. He was the guy who had settled into a routine, someone I had convinced myself I was happy with. But as I listened to my friends talk about their fit, handsome husbands, I felt this gnawing discomfort deep inside me. That night, as we walked back home from the bar, I kept thinking about what Jenna had said. Was I unhappy with Chris? Was I somehow dissatisfied with my life? The first confrontation. The following Monday, the conversation with Chris was more awkward than I had expected. We hadn't talked much that weekend after my friend's comments. It was like this invisible wall had formed between us, and I couldn't quite get past it. So, after a long day of work, I decided to bring it up. "Chris, can we talk for a minute?" I asked, sitting down on the couch beside him. He looked up from his phone, nodding with a curious expression. "What's going on? You seem distant." I wasn't sure how to word what I was feeling. After all, how do you bring up something as trivial as physical attraction without sounding shallow or superficial? "I don't know, I guess I've just been thinking," I said slowly, avoiding his gaze. "Do you ever think about, I don't know, changing anything? Like your routine or how you take care of yourself?" He looked at me in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said, my voice unsure. "Maybe you could work out more or eat healthier. I feel like it might be good for both of us." Chris sat back, his face slowly turning serious. "Are you saying I'm out of shape?" "I didn't mean it like that," I quickly added, feeling defensive. "I just think it might be something we could do together." He looked at me for a moment, his eyes narrowing as if he were processing my words. Then he let out a laugh. "I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at, but okay. If you want to go to the gym, I'll go with you. But you're the one who has to sign up first." I smiled at him, relieved that he wasn't angry. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe I had said something wrong. His response felt more like a half-hearted effort than genuine enthusiasm. The conversation had barely even scratched the surface of what I was truly feeling. The growing distance. As the days passed, the unease between us only grew. Chris and I no longer shared the same connection we once had. His work schedule had become more demanding, and his time at home was often spent in front of the TV, scrolling through social media or working on his laptop. And me? Well, I had started noticing other things I shouldn't have noticed. It wasn't until I ran into someone at work that I first questioned my feelings. His name was Matt, a guy who had recently joined our team. He was charming, with an easy smile and a way of making people feel at ease. I hadn't thought much of it at first, but over the course of the next few weeks, Matt and I found ourselves spending more time together during lunch breaks and after work. He would casually compliment me, mentioning how smart I was or how much he admired my work ethic. It was innocent enough at first, but then something changed. His compliments became more personal, and my heart would race when I saw him. One day, we were sitting in the break room when Matt mentioned he was going to be heading to a local bar with some friends after work. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Maybe I'll join you." His eyes lit up. "I'd love that." The growing tension. And that's when everything shifted. That night at the bar, after a few drinks, something inside me clicked. I wasn't just talking to Matt anymore. I was looking at him, really looking at him. His sharp jawline, his confident smile, the way he seemed to command the room with his presence. It all made me forget about everything that had been bothering me with Chris. Felt like a breath of fresh air. We talked for hours, and as the night wore on, it became clear to me that something was happening. Something I couldn't deny. When Matt leaned in to say goodbye, I caught myself wondering how it would feel if he kissed me. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Matt. The way his words echoed in my head. The way he made me feel seen in a way that Chris hadn't in months. But I was still married, and I still loved Chris. Didn't I? If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more content. Let me know what you think in the comments. The days following that night at the bar were a blur. I couldn't stop replaying the moment when Matt leaned in to say goodbye. The feel of his eyes on me, the closeness we shared in those few seconds. The longer I tried to dismiss it, the stronger the memory became. My thoughts were consumed by him, by the thrill of feeling desired in a way that I hadn't felt in months. But the guilt began to eat at me too. I had a husband. I was married to Chris, the man I had sworn to love and cherish. And yet, I was fantasizing about someone else. The contrast between the familiarity of Chris' touch and the spark that Matt had ignited in me created this pull, this tug-of-war inside my mind. I knew something had to change. It wasn't long before Matt texted me, asking if I wanted to grab another drink after work. Part of me knew it was a dangerous game to play, but another part of me, one that hadn't felt alive in so long, felt like this was the escape I had been craving. I had been stuck in a rut for months, unable to connect with Chris in the way I used to. And Matt, with his charm and attention, was offering a new world. A world where I didn't have to play the same role of the dutiful wife. I responded to Matt's text with an invitation to meet at a new bar downtown. He was quick to agree. The excitement coursed through me as I made my way there after work. When I arrived, I noticed Matt almost immediately, sitting at the bar with a grin that was just a little too inviting. I walked over, my heart racing. I had never done anything like this before, but now it felt like I couldn't stop. "Did you miss me?" he asked, his voice low and playful, as I sat down next to him. "I did," I admitted, surprised by how easily the words came. "I missed this." Just talking without any pretense. Matt's eyes darkened for a moment, and his smile widened. "Well, I'm glad you showed up. I've been thinking about you." And just like that, everything I had told myself about loyalty, about not crossing a line, started to feel irrelevant. We shared a drink, and as the conversation flowed, I found myself forgetting about the man I had promised myself to. The line was crossed the moment Matt reached out and touched my arm. It was subtle, just a brush of his fingers, but the charge between us was undeniable. I looked at him, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw the same desire reflected in his eyes. It was intoxicating, and it was everything I had been missing: attention, validation, excitement. I leaned in, closing the space between us. Without thinking, I kissed him. It was a slow, tentative kiss at first, but the intensity grew quickly, as though we had both been waiting for this moment to finally arrive. When we broke away, both of us were breathless. I felt something surge within me. Guilt, yes, but also a thrilling sense of freedom. But before I could fully process what had just happened, my phone buzzed on the table. It was Chris. The text was simple: "How's your night going?" I froze. The moment I had just shared with Matt felt like a secret that was too big to hide. I hesitated, staring at my phone. My heart pounded in my chest, and I realized just how far I had gone, how far I had let myself go. And suddenly, the truth became clear. I had crossed a line I never thought I would. I excused myself from Matt, telling him I needed a moment to clear my head. As I stepped outside, I breathed in the cool night air, trying to regain some semblance of control. I couldn't believe what I had just done. I had kissed another man. I had betrayed Chris, the person I had sworn to love and support. But at the same time, a part of me felt like it had been awakened in a way that was undeniable. I sat on a bench trying to calm my racing thoughts. My phone buzzed again. It was Chris. "I miss you," the text read. I squeezed my eyes shut. How could I even look at him the same way again after what I had just done? The guilt weighed heavily on me, but there was something else there too. A strange, conflicted desire. When I returned home later that night, Chris was already in bed. The house was quiet, save for the sound of his soft breathing. I stood in the doorway, watching him for a moment, and my heart twisted. How could I look him in the eyes knowing what I had done? But instead of confronting it, I slipped into bed beside him, careful not to wake him. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, fighting the overwhelming guilt that churned in my stomach. But in the silence of the night, another thought began to creep in. Was this the end? Was this where our marriage ended, with me caught between two worlds? I knew that the next few days would be crucial. How could I face him after what had happened? How could I go back to the life I had once known when all I could think about was Matt? The following morning, I woke up early, as usual, to find Chris already up and making coffee in the kitchen. His presence was soothing, familiar, but also a stark reminder of the lie I was now living. He smiled as I walked in, offering me a cup of coffee. "How was your night?" he asked, his voice soft. I paused, my mind racing. How could I answer him without revealing everything? Could I even pretend like nothing had happened? "It was fine," I said, the words feeling hollow as soon as they left my mouth. Chris raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, he went on talking about his plans for the day, work, errands, the usual. I nodded along, my mind not fully present, consumed by the weight of what I had done. That evening, after dinner, we sat on the couch together. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. I felt the warmth of his body, but it only deepened my sense of disconnect. How could I keep living like this? How could I keep lying to him when my heart was so tangled with Matt? And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Matt. "Can't stop thinking about last night." I stared at the message, the words burning in my hands. It felt like the universe was pushing me toward something I wasn't ready for. But what if this was the way out? What if Matt offered me the escape I had been longing for? My heart pounded in my chest. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to risk everything for someone who might never truly understand me? And there it was, the tipping point. I knew that I couldn't go on living in this state of confusion. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when all I wanted was something different. But was I ready to make the decision? To leave behind everything I had built with Chris for the unknown with Matt? I had to choose. And in that moment, I realized there was no going back. Don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Subscribe to my channel for more stories just like this. And let me know what you think is going to happen next. After that text from Matt, I knew the time had come. The decision I had been avoiding was now inescapable. I couldn't keep living this lie, playing both sides. I was standing on the edge of something, and the only way to move forward was to make a choice, one that would change everything. That evening, I found myself sitting across from Chris at the dinner table. The house was quiet, too quiet for comfort. Chris had been distant recently, his usual energy drained by the daily grind. I could sense his frustration building, even though he hadn't said much. He was working harder than ever, trying to keep everything together, but the cracks in our relationship were getting bigger. "So, how was your day?" he asked, his tone casual, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He was trying to mask something just like I had been doing. He wanted to believe everything was fine, but it wasn't, and neither of us could ignore it anymore. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. I had to be honest. I had to come clean. Chris, there's something I need to tell you. I began, my voice shaking. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. What's going on? He asked, his eyes narrowing. He knew something was off. He just didn't know what, and I could see that fear starting to creep into his expression. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. I've been seeing someone else. His face froze, and for a moment, I thought he might not even hear me. The room felt suffocating. I could feel the weight of the words I had just said, and I wasn't sure how to continue. What? He whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I rushed, not knowing how to fix the mess I had created. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. Chris's hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Who? He asked, the one word coming out sharp and raw. It's Matt, I said, bracing myself for his reaction. He was quiet for a moment, processing the information, and then it all seemed to hit him at once. Chris stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The air between us felt charged, like electricity was crackling in the space. He took a step back, his eyes narrowing, and for the first time in years, I saw something different in him. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by something darker. Matt? He repeated, as if trying to make sense of the name. The guy from work? I nodded, barely able to meet his gaze. Yes, it started out innocent, just talking, but it turned into something else. His expression twisted with a mix of disbelief and anger. How could you do this to me, to us? His voice cracked with emotion, and I could see the hurt in his eyes. It was a pain I had caused, and it was too much to bear. I didn't mean for it to happen this way, I whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. You've already hurt me, he snapped, his voice rising. You've destroyed everything. You've destroyed us. The words stung. I had never seen Chris like this before. The man I had once known, who had been so gentle and patient, was gone, replaced by someone filled with rage and heartbreak. And I knew deep down that I had caused it. I had pushed him to this breaking point. Chris's reaction was brutal. He didn't yell, but the silence between us spoke volumes. The air was thick with tension, and every breath I took felt like it was drowning me. I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he processed everything. This wasn't just a simple argument. This was the end of something that had been built over years. I want you to leave, he said, his voice cold and detached. I can't do this anymore. I don't know who you are anymore. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't expected this. Not like this. I thought maybe there was a chance for reconciliation. But now I knew. It was over. And I had no one to blame but myself. I'll leave, I said softly, my heart breaking with every word. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to lose him, but I had already lost him. I could see it in his eyes. He had checked out. This was no longer the man I had married. This was someone who had been betrayed, someone who was now facing the harsh reality of what I had done. I packed my things in a daze, the room spinning around me as I grabbed whatever I could fit into my bag. I didn't want to look at Chris anymore, didn't want to see the tears in his eyes. I was the cause of those tears, and I couldn't bear it. When I walked out the door, I didn't look back. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay. Not with him. Not when everything had fallen apart so completely. The night was cold, and the streetlights blurred as I walked aimlessly, not knowing what to do next. I had no plan, no direction. All I knew was that my life as I had known it was over. I ended up at a hotel later that evening. I didn't want to call anyone, didn't want to face anyone. I just needed to be alone. The quiet of the room was suffocating, but at least it was a moment to breathe. And yet, I couldn't escape the reality of what I had done. The weight of my choices was crushing, and I knew that I couldn't undo what had happened. I had betrayed the person I had loved. I had ruined my marriage. And for what? In the days that followed, I realized just how much I had taken for granted. I had always believed that everything would work itself out, that somehow the pieces would fall back into place. But they didn't, and now I was facing the consequences of my actions. Chris was gone, and so was the life I had built with him. I didn't have the comfort of his presence to fall back on, nor the security of the routine we had shared. I was alone, truly alone for the first time in a long time. But I couldn't forget about Matt either. The affair was still a part of me, a part of what had led me to this point. The allure of his attention, the excitement he had sparked. It was intoxicating. But now, I was left wondering if that momentary escape had been worth it. Was it worth losing everything? With no clear answers, I was left standing on the precipice of my life. What would I do now? Would I try to rebuild my marriage, even though I had broken it beyond repair? Or would I walk away, chasing the fleeting satisfaction that had led me astray? And in the back of my mind, I knew that no matter what choice I made, the damage was already done. I had crossed a line and I couldn't take it back. Stay tuned for the next part of the story as we head toward the final resolution and explore the aftermath of these crucial decisions. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more updates on this story. The tension continues to build, and as we draw closer to the pivotal moment, everything starts to unravel. The stakes are higher now, the relationships are frayed, and each choice feels like it could change the course of the story forever. The weight of the consequences is heavy, and it's clear that the main characters are reaching a boiling point. The next morning, everything felt different. The quiet hum of the hotel room was a stark contrast to the chaos of the night before. I had no idea how to move forward, but I knew that the confrontation with Chris was inevitable. I couldn't keep hiding from the reality of what I had done. No matter how painful it might be, I had to face him. We had to have this conversation, the one we'd been avoiding for so long. I called him. My fingers trembled as I dialed his number, but I couldn't stop myself. I needed to hear his voice, to know where we stood. When Chris picked up, there was a long silence on the other end. Neither of us knew where to start. "Chris," I said, my voice fragile.
I'm sorry.
"I know I messed up, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but we need to talk." "I don't think there's much to talk about," he replied, his voice cold, distant. The sharpness in his tone hurt more than anything I could have expected. It was the sound of someone who had been betrayed beyond measure. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, the disappointment. "You made your choice, and now you need to live with it." The words stung more than I was ready for, but I couldn't back down. I couldn't let it end like this, not without at least trying to fix it. "I know I've hurt you," I said, my throat tight with emotion, "but I still love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." There was a pause on the other end of the line. For a moment I thought he might soften, might give me a chance to explain myself. But when he spoke again, it felt like the final nail in the coffin. "I can't keep doing this, not with someone who doesn't respect me enough to be honest," he said, his voice breaking. "You can't love me and betray me like this, Emily. I don't know who you are anymore." His words hit me like a ton of bricks, knocking the wind out of me. All of the excuses, all of the reasons I had given myself for my actions, suddenly felt meaningless. I had lost him, and I knew it. "I'm sorry," I whispered, barely able to hold back the tears. I wish I could take it all back. But the damage had already been done. And as I listened to the phone click off, the finality of it all set in. Chris was gone. My marriage was over. And the pain of realizing I had thrown it all away for a fleeting moment of excitement was unbearable. It didn't take long for the repercussions of my decisions to begin unfolding. With Chris gone, I was left alone in a hotel room, far from home, far from the life I once knew. I didn't know where to turn. I couldn't call Chris, not after everything that had happened. I couldn't reach out to anyone who knew me, not with the shame of what I had done weighing so heavily on me. It was just me now, and the isolation was suffocating. Matt had been calling, texting, trying to reach me, but the last thing I wanted to do was deal with him. After everything that had happened, I realized how foolish I had been to think that he was the solution to my problems. He was just another mistake, another piece of the puzzle that had led me here. I ignored his calls. I didn't need him. What I needed was to face the mess I had created, to somehow find a way to move forward. I spent the next few days in the hotel room, replaying every decision I had made, every moment that had led to this disaster. It was impossible to ignore the painful truth. I had destroyed my marriage. I had betrayed the person who loved me. And for what? A brief escape from the reality I didn't want to face? The guilt was unbearable. But it wasn't just guilt. It was regret. Regret for thinking that I could have everything without consequences. Regret for not being honest with myself, with Chris, with everyone around me. One night, while staring blankly at the hotel ceiling, something clicked. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but more of a slow realization. I wasn't just sorry for what I had done to Chris. I was sorry for what I had done to myself. I had spent so much time chasing something outside of my marriage, thinking that it would make me happy, thinking that it would fill the void I was feeling. But in the end, all it did was create a deeper emptiness. I had lost the person I loved, and I had destroyed the life I had worked so hard to build. In that moment, I knew I had to take responsibility for my actions. I couldn't keep blaming others. I couldn't keep making excuses. The only way forward was to face the consequences head-on, even if it meant losing everything I had once valued. I packed up my things and checked out of the hotel. I didn't know what was next, but I knew that I had to make things right. Somehow, I had to fix the damage I had caused. As I made my way back to my apartment, I knew that the real work had just begun. I couldn't undo the past, but maybe I could start over. Maybe, just maybe, I could learn from this experience and rebuild my life. The first step was facing Chris. I didn't know if he would ever forgive me, or if there was even a chance to salvage what we had, but I couldn't live with the regret of not trying. I reached out to him one last time, sending a message that was simple but honest. I know I can't change what I did, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I wasn't expecting a response. I wasn't expecting anything, really, but when the text came through a few hours later, I couldn't believe it. "I'm not sure what the future holds for us," the message read, "but I'm willing to talk. Just not yet." The door wasn't completely closed, and maybe that was enough for now. The tension in the story has reached its peak, and we're at a pivotal moment in the character's journey. The climax is building, and every decision from here will define the character's future. The emotional stakes have never been higher, and the story is pushing towards a final resolution. Stay tuned as we approach the final step in the story's conclusion. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. The days following that message from Chris were filled with anticipation and uncertainty. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew I couldn't keep hiding from the truth anymore. It was time to face him, to confront everything that had led us to this point. I walked into the coffee shop where we agreed to meet, my heart pounding in my chest. The weight of what I had done was still fresh, but now it felt like the right moment to take the first step towards healing. I saw him sitting at a table near the window, his eyes already on me. For a second, I wanted to turn and leave. I wasn't ready to face the man I had hurt so deeply, but I knew I had to. "Hey!" I said softly as I approached, my voice shaky. I'm sorry. For everything." Chris didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. Finally, he let out a deep sigh, setting his coffee cup down. "I've been thinking a lot about this," he began, his tone steady but tinged with the pain of what had happened. "And I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you. What you did. It hurt me more than I thought it would." His words stung, but I understood. I had betrayed his trust, and I knew it would take time for him to process everything. But I couldn't give up yet, not without trying to make things right. "I understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I regret everything. I never meant to hurt you." Chris nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. The tension in his shoulders seemed to ease a little. There was still pain in his eyes, but there was something else there too. A glimmer of understanding, maybe even a hint of hope. "I don't know what the future holds," he said after a moment, "but I'm willing to work through this. If you're willing to try too." I felt a sense of relief wash over me, though I knew it wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. But it was a start, and that was enough for now. The days that followed were filled with difficult conversations and emotional healing. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But slowly, Chris and I began to rebuild our relationship, piece by piece. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. We were both different people now, shaped by the choices we had made and the lessons we had learned. For me, the biggest lesson was that happiness didn't come from escaping my problems. It came from facing them head-on. I had spent so much time running away from the realities of my life, thinking that I could find fulfillment elsewhere. But all I had found was more emptiness. It was only when I stopped looking for a quick fix that I began to find real peace. As for Chris, he had changed too. He had always been a forgiving person, but this was different. He wasn't just letting me back into his life without question. He was making the conscious decision to trust me again, to believe in the possibility of our future together. It wasn't easy, but I could see the effort he was putting in, and it made me want to try even harder. We spent the next few months rebuilding our connection, one conversation at a time. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of doubt, but I could see the progress we were making. We weren't the same people we were before the betrayal, but maybe that was for the best. We were stronger now, more aware of the importance of trust, honesty, and communication. It's been a while since that day in the coffee shop, and things are different now. Not just between Chris and me, but in my own life. I've learned that the key to happiness isn't in perfection. It's in growth. It's in accepting that mistakes happen, but they don't define us. What matters is how we move forward, how we learn from those mistakes, and how we make amends where we can. Chris and I are still together. We've had our ups and downs, but we've also had moments of joy and connection that I didn't think were possible after everything that happened. We're not the perfect couple, but we're real. And that, I think, is enough. As for me, I've come to understand that my self-worth isn't defined by my mistakes or by anyone else's opinion of me. I spent so much time trying to measure up to others, trying to be something I wasn't. But now, I know that the only person I need to answer to is myself. I'm learning to embrace who I am, flaws and all, and that's where true growth begins. And so, as the sun sets on this chapter of my life, I look ahead to the future with a sense of hope, knowing that I can face whatever comes next. I've learned the hard way that life isn't always easy, but it's always worth it if you're willing to learn and grow along the way. And that's it. The story that started with a moment of temptation and betrayal ends with a story of growth, redemption, and the hard-fought battle for trust. It's a reminder that we're all human, and sometimes we make mistakes, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward. Life is full of second chances, and it's never too late to make things right. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this journey, and remember, there's always room for growth and a chance for a better tomorrow. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.